Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, It Helps to Read the Fine Print. A family friend got married. He works at a power company. He ends up inventing some kind of new device which saves his company a bunch of money. He patents it and becomes very rich. Now, this guy, let's call him John, is a simple man. He likes to hunt, fish, and enjoy the great outdoors. John is also very much a do-it-yourself type of guy. Well, John and his wife decide to use their newfound wealth to move into a nice neighborhood that just so happens to have an HOA. The first hunting season comes around. John puts in a pole to hang his freshly killed deer so he can butcher it, and then he goes out and bags himself a deer. John proceeds to butcher the deer in his backyard, which the neighbor wasn't too happy with, and John got reported to the HOA. He ends up having to pay some fines, removing the stand, etc. Well, remember when I said John was a simple man? Also, remember how he patented a new technology and made his money off that? John was no idiot, he was quite smart. So John pored over the HOA Association bylaws. There were no rules against butchering deer on your property. However, you couldn't put in an artificial pole in the ground. So John worked with the HOA to plant a brand new tree in his front yard. He said it would increase property value, and the HOA was happy to oblige. So John planted his tree. And come the next hunting season, John tied up his catch to the tree and butchered the deer on a lovely Sunday afternoon for all to see. Next one is titled, Log My Every Mistake and Wrongdoing? No way, lady. So this just happened about 6 months ago. I got a job in a different department than the one I started in. Great job really, I really like my manager and my supervisor, but my coworker in this department is a bit weird. She's a neat freak and you can't set or leave anything on her desk without permission. You can't touch her chair because she has back problems. She slaves all over her job and whines constantly about how much work she has. I started my role and floundered a bit. I didn't really get training and it was a struggle for a while, but I slowly got the hang of things and got pretty good at what I do. Except my coworker has decided that she doesn't like me and has started picking fights over stupid stuff. And I do mean stupid stuff. Like if I was working on something and she needed something taken care of, she would ask me to do it, and opposed to waiting for me to finish what I was doing, she would start yelling at me. Or if I did something that annoyed her, like ask her what time she wanted to take her lunch, that would be another scream fest as she shrieked at me for not knowing what her schedule was and bothering her at her sacred desk. It got bad enough that we both got called into a meeting where our manager told us that we needed to work things out or they would make changes, and left it there. That improved things for a little while, and then she was back to where she was before. Then I realized that she was keeping a log on me of every single mistake I had ever made. Seriously, put a box on the wrong shelf? It goes in the log. Leave a power supply out of something by accident? It goes in the log. It got to the point that she complained to my manager when she thought my clothes weren't clean enough to wear to work. We work in a warehouse. I don't wear nice clothes in my role. And I ended up having to have an embarrassing conversation with my manager. I started to retaliate by going to my supervisor whenever she flipped out on me to complain that this wasn't acceptable. We're supposed to be on the same team, and screaming at your coworkers isn't kosher. Management agreed with me, and more than a few discussions were had with her about her attitude. So the Cold War went on for a while, and to their credit, my management team tried their best to make it work. They had both of us take a conflict management resolution course. We had our conflict styles analyzed. They coached us. The thing was, they pretty much came to the same conclusion that I did. She didn't like me and didn't care if I knew it and wanted me gone. So we finally had a blow-up that was bad enough that she decided it was time to break out the big guns. She took the log of my sins to our manager to show how incompetent I was. She got shot down in a hurry on that one. Apparently keeping a mistakes log on your colleague is not considered to be a productive part of teamwork. Also, after all this went down, I finally forced her to have a discussion with me, and I just stood my ground. I told her that I'm not hard to work with, I'm glad to help out with stuff, but I needed her to be reasonable about things. Management agreed with me and gave us some suggestions that to her credit she attempted to partake in, and things were okay for a couple of months. Then my wife called me one day to confess to me that she'd come down with a medical problem that she had been hiding from me because she was embarrassed about it. It shook me up a bit, but I went and talked to my supervisor and I felt a lot better afterward. I went back to work and immediately got grilled by the coworker. Where did I go and what was I doing? Talking with our supervisor. About what? Something private. She kept badgering me about it to the point that I had to ask her to stop and leave it alone because I didn't want to talk to her about it. Well, this upset her something fierce. The next day when we were working, she asked me a question about something, and when I responded she completely lost her mind and accused me of treating her poorly and demanded to know what the problem was. I told her I had some problems at home and if it was affecting my work I was sorry. She told me I was full of crap, was lying about stuff to try and gather sympathy for me because I was so incompetent at my job. And that was it. It was war. I put down the equipment I'd been working with and left the room, and when I walked away she was taunting me. Why don't you go tell your mommy how I was mean to you? Because she guessed correctly that I was heading right to the supervisor. Well, the supervisor was upset, wrote down the entire incident, wrote her up, and filled in our manager too, who was also not very impressed. As for me, the gloves were off. This witch had to go. So I picked up my perfect weapon. The job she had been dog-ducking around in the last few months. We'd recently gotten a huge computer upgrade in the role that she covered and she should have been able to work a lot faster at her job. Instead, she took time pointing out all the flaws in the new system and filling her mistakes diary with all my errors and wrongdoings. One day I even caught her taking pictures of equipment that I'd worked on. As it turns out, I'd had to cover for her a couple of times and the job she was doing did not take the amount of time she was allotted to do it. I managed to finish off an entire day of work for her in the span of 90 minutes. And the next time she took a day off the same thing happened. 90 minutes or less for everything that would normally take her a full 8 hours. So I told my supervisor, and the next time she took a day off, she got staff from another department to cover her spot for me, and one person posted a result slightly slower than mine and the other person was actually a little faster than I was. So now my supervisor was in agreement with me. She was dog-ducking and we both knew it. Time to spring my trap. Our management team goes absolutely giddy for efficiency. Anything that makes your work better or faster will actually get listened to and usually approved. So I sat down and wrote a proposal that essentially broke our work area down into 2 zones. One being the returned equipment area and the other being the processing, configuring area. I magnanimously offered to take all of the processing and configuring off her plate and would allow her to deal with all of the returned equipment. On the surface, this looked like I was offering to do even more work than before simply so that we could stop butting heads at work and be more efficient. In reality, I was offloading almost half of my entire job onto her in exchange for something that she had been screwing around with and trying to look busy doing. It went even better than I expected. I submitted my proposal to our supervisor, who loved it, and she in turn asked our manager to review it and she thought it was excellent as well. And then they asked my colleague for her thoughts on the whole thing. And she flipped her ducking lid. In email no less. And I know that because my supervisor just forwarded the original email to her and she hit reply all to it. She demanded that they immediately trash this idea, called me lazy and stupid, implied that she had way more seniority than me, told them that I wasn't smart enough to do her job, that I was discriminating against her and threatened to take legal action. Management stalled on this a little bit because she was a long-time employee and she was making some very damning accusations. But my supervisor and manager had documented the litany of explosions I'd had to deal with while working with her and all of our stories matched up. As a coup de grace, when I got called into HR to give my side of the story, I pointed out that the log and pictures she had been taken amounted to a campaign of harassment and was causing me to work in a toxic working environment. HR transferred her to another department where she proceeded to infuriate, vex and anger anyone she worked with while being given a workload about 1/6 of everyone else in the department. After about 2 months of this, the notice came out from HR that she was no longer part of the company. No less than 15 co-workers stopped by to congratulate me for being the one to finally outlast her. As a victory party, we reorganized the working area in the back and we got rid of her desk and chair and pictures and anything else that she might have contaminated with her insane attitude. She was there almost 20 years. Maxed out salary scale. 5 weeks of vacation per year. Decent benefits, retirement plan, all of it. Now she can't even use us for a reference because she left on such bad terms. I don't even want to know what she's up to, because she was so unpleasant to deal with, but I can't imagine finding a new job at anything other than fast food is possible with a 15+ year gap in her resume. Next one is titled, "Don't Feel Like Doing Your Job? We'll fatten you up with kindness." I made a girl fat, and not by marrying her. In 2003, my office got a new secretary and a new manager. The secretary, a thin blonde, was a vile she-devil. She wouldn't do anything the staff asked, find info, set up calls, get coffee for anyone who wasn't herself, and the manager wouldn't do anything about it. We joked that her job title was Internet Quality Control because she more or less sent a personal email and played on MySpace all day, to which when she overheard, literally went to the manager in tears. Then one day I got a rather large jar of candy as a gift and she just about single-handedly consumed half of it, which angered me good. Then later that week, I brought in a dozen donuts and she ate half of them on her own. Upon putting the facts together, our web designer, editor, and I decided to fuel the fire in something we called Operation Butter Up, where we each, in turn, brought in a large bag of candy to fill up my jar as fast as she could empty it. In the course of 3 months, she put on 20 pounds. In a year's time, she was unrecognizable and along with being a crank, she was an idiot and couldn't figure out how. Several times a week we provided her sweets and snacks of every kind until her boyfriend dumped her, which was about 8 months into the project, and she had to get a new wardrobe. We lucked out because she was rather stupid, but we had more diabolical measures lined up if she stopped eating the candy, along the lines of mixing in weight gainer to the non-dairy creamer she was using and things of that nature. That was 2003 and she's still big to this day. Saw her on Facebook, and smiled at our handiwork. Still single to this day and I would like to think that we had something to do with it. Last one is titled, "I basically looked into the future and predicted exactly what would happen." This happened about 12 months ago. I am a nurse and work in a relatively specialized field. Due to previous financial difficulties, I had taken on a number of additional jobs in the previous few years and had settled on one that was particularly good for me. I was employed casually in a smaller 6-bedded unit in a private hospital. Because of the nature of my specialty, this particular area required 2 nurses in attendance at all times. 2 nurses to 6 patients is a dream ratio and virtually unheard of in private health. To combat this, most hospitals that have beds for this particular specialty area combine them with another ward so that they can staff us down and allow the regular nurses to cover us. However, for some reason, this hospital had located the beds completely separate to any other unit. This meant they had no choice to safely staff us but to roster 2 nurses on at all times, and our manager stood her ground and refused to budge on that requirement. Because I was casually employed, there was always the possibility that my hours could be cut or shifts cancelled at any time. However, because they needed both nurses present at all times, they could not do that. Even if we had no patients in this particular specialty area, they had to keep 2 nurses available in case we needed to admit. If we had no patients at all, some nurses would go on call, but because I relied on public transport bicycle commuting to get to work, my manager understood that I could not go on call because I could not return to the workplace in a reasonable time, and instead I would be sent to help out in other areas. Our manager had, in addition to her other duties, become the project lead on a large expansion within our facility, and had performed very well in the role. So well, in fact, that when another facility under the same company was expanding, she was headhunted to lead their expansion project as well. She was compelled to a secondment that would require her to live out of state for several months, and as a result, we would be given a new acting manager. To our dismay, we discovered that the acting manager was from a ward where it was well known that the staff could not stand her. Sure enough, within days, she began doing things like cancelling our staff and moving her surplus staff into our area when she was low on numbers and overstaffed, costing them to us, even though they lacked the appropriate training and experience to work in our area. anything to make her budget look better, which at the same time made our budget look worse. It all came to a head one morning when, after 2 hours of a 12-hour shift, we discharged our last patient. I was literally on the phone finalizing the patient discharge when our acting manager called the other nurse on the shift and instructed both of us to clock out immediately and go on call. Confused, I rang her back. Me, hi AM, it's Schmickers. I just got a message saying that you want us to clock out and go home. You may not be aware, although our previous manager was, but I take public transport to and from work. I can't be on call. AM, that doesn't matter. You have no patience. I can't pay for you to be on the ward doing nothing and no other areas require help today. I need you to clock off and go home. Me, are you sure? We are halfway through checking the emergency trolley, there is a massive pile of follow-up calls to make and we haven't even stripped the patient room yet. AM, that doesn't matter. Bring me your phone and keys and clock off. Me, what are you going to do if there is an admission? It will take me over an hour to get back. AM, well I'll sit there until you can get back. I was fuming. The other nurse began resealing the emergency trolley and I stopped her. We had been instructed to leave, and leave we would. I marched the phone and keys to our acting manager and handed them over. As I did so, she said, "You can't be paid to sit and make phone calls. That has to be done when you have patients." I replied, "We are busy with the patients when we have patients. Besides, it's only just past 9 AM, and most of the follow-up calls are to families with children who are busy doing school runs. I wouldn't answer a call from an unknown number before 9 AM. I handed the keys over, clocked off, and began the journey home. I hadn't reached home before I got a message from my other workplace, asking for a nurse for the night shift and offering an overtime payment. Now, I was booked for a day shift at my second job the next day, and I knew we had no theater cases booked, which meant the likelihood of that shift being cancelled was also high. I couldn't afford to sit at home waiting for work if we didn't have patients, but just to be sure, I gave the union a quick call, and they managed to illuminate something wonderful. As a casual employee, I was not entitled to be on call at all. That meant not only could they not ask me to be on call, but I also was not entitled to the measly $26 allowance that permanent employees received. As soon as I had clocked out, my shift had ended. Armed with that knowledge, I rang my acting manager and informed her that I had been offered to pay work that night, and as a consequence, would need to cancel my shift the following day. She was quite hostile, asking, "Do you normally cancel work here to work elsewhere?" I replied, "I don't normally have my shifts cancelled at all, but I am not a charity and cannot sit at home unpaid when I could be paid to work elsewhere. I have a family to support." After this call, I sent a quick email to my usual manager, outlining the acting manager's request and why I had left the ward disorganized, the emergency trolley unsealed, and a stack of work not done, and went to bed to have a nap. I was awoken at approximately 16:15 in the afternoon by my wife, looking confused. My acting manager had rung and left a message with her that we were admitting a patient and she required me back at work. I was bemused. The acting manager should not even have been there at that time of the afternoon, and clearly lacked the stones to talk to me directly. No matter. I rang the hospital supervisor. Me, hi, it's Schmickers. I just got a message via my wife that I'm a bit confused about. Apparently there is a patient, and you want me to come into work for a shift? Supervisor, that's right, we're admitting to your area. We need you back in. Me, you know my shift was cancelled, right? Supervisor, AM told me you were on call? Me, well, I can't be on call, I'm a casual employee. My shift was cancelled. Besides, by the time I've dressed, packed, got on my bicycle, ridden half an hour to my nearest train station, caught the train, changed to a tram, then walked the rest of the way, then showered and changed, it'll be a quick check of the time, 18:30. My shift was meant to end at 19:30. I don't think I'm going to be much help to you. I heard the sound of the phone being covered, and a muffled voice, before shouting and ranting began in the background. It was my acting manager, still clearly there and clutching her pearls about how unreasonable it was that it would take 2 hours for me to return to work. As the ranting continued, I spoke on the phone again. Supervisor, it's Schmickers. I know you have AM shouting at you in the background, but right now I'm the person you need to be listening to because I called you. AM is well aware of how long it takes me to return to work because I told her this morning. She knew when she asked me to clock off that I would not be returning to work. I'm sorry she gave you the impression that I could be on call, but I cannot. Now, as I am not able to assist you any further and I am not on the clock, I will be ending this conversation. And I put the phone down. I got a couple of confusing texts about why I wasn't working the next day and what the hell had happened on the ward from the night staff when they arrived and began resealing the emergency trolley and arranging for after-hours bed cleans. I had a week off after that. Unfortunately, this particular manager appears to be Teflon coated, but I've never had a shift cancelled since. Thanks for listening.